Night presses against your skin like wet linen. Salt wind stings your lips. The eel traps thrum, water-slapping basalt weirs, a pulse as steady as your breath. Clapsticks carry across the dark like two stones kissing. Metronome to a labor older than iron, older than maps. You crouch at Budj Bim, the ground warm from the day, smoke lifting in thin blue threads from low huts where eel flesh glows and tightens on racks. If the crackle in your chest says don't look away, subscribe to What If Wars, and stay with me while we turn the shoreline inside out. You taste ash and river. You feel what the old problem always felt like, not as a line in a book, but as grit under your nails. People scattered thin across a continent the size of a sleeping giant. Rain that comes like a feast and then starves you. Long distances that pull at your calves and suck your water skins dry. No hooves to drag stone or grain. Metal rare, small, more charm than chain. And beyond the horizon, strangers with coughs that travel faster than sails. You know the story you were given. Small camps, lean fires, the land is pantry but never warehouse. You've heard the neat mistake, but hear the slap of water again. Feel the catch tighten the nets. These V-shaped weirs and stone races were not accidents of rockfall. They're deliberate geometry, a labor savings account in basalt. Eels fatten on patience, then smoke takes them the rest of the way. Salt, heat, time, so they keep. Surplus you can hold in your hands, stack in bundles, count by the weight. What changes if eel traps become an economic engine and law travels by sea? Your fingers find red dust in the dark, ochre under the nails, and suddenly you are standing in Wilgie Mia without moving. Because trade does that, it folds the map. The red shows you the way it always has, smeared on skin and tools, proof of passage. Hundreds of kilometers carried by feet and stories. Greenstone edges from Mount William bite clean and bright and hard. Heads wrapped for travel, leaving one country and arriving in another with nothing but a song to guarantee the route. You lift a message stick to the smoke and see cuts that aren't words trying to be someone else. They're law you can touch. A tally, a promise, a memory that lasts longer than a mouth. Songlines rise in you like constellations, not metaphors, but directions. A verse that tells you where the water hides after heat. A refrain that warns about a reef that will knife your hull if you don't turn in time. The ground remembers, so does the sea. You hum, and the coast answers. Mangrove tang in your nose, mud cold on your shins, a curl of swell that speaks of wind 2 days away. You are holding a map that breathes, and it breathes you. The old constraint is still there. You name it so you can break it honestly. Low numbers scattered wide. Rain that won't keep a promise. No oxen at the yoke. Metal as a glint, not a system. And sickness that can undo a generation in a season. You won't lie to yourself. You won't conjure plows from air. You keep your eyes on the water because the water keeps its word more often than the sky. You lean into the night drift of a bark canoe. The rasp of its ribs under your palms feels like a drum skin. Poles thud into the channel floor, soft and certain. You picture the weirs not as a project, but as a network, the way a scar becomes a seam. River mouths as depots, smokehouses as banks, salt pans that shine like mirrors, loading the sun into flesh so it will last the walk. Cool pits where the heat dies and the meat waits. You tally with shells smooth as river tongues, a standard you can count by touch in the dark. 30 bundles, 60, 100. A number big enough to feed a festival or to pay for safe passage through a narrow, where the current loves to drown the proud. You look inland without leaving the coast. The Wilgie Mia road is in feet and lungs and time, but the sea gives you another choice. Lift your cargo on water, so weight dissolves into buoyancy and distance melts into swell. Power stops being the size of your harvest and becomes the reliability of your logistics. Who pilots you through the sandbar at moonless low tide? Who witnesses your obligations when your canoe touches a foreign shore? Who sings the right verse at the right bend when your throat is dust and your mind is smoke? The clapsticks slow and the smoke thickens. You step into a hut where eels hang like dark cords, fat crackles. You could bite the air and taste salt. This is not a pantry, this is a ledger. Every rack is time converted into trust. Every bundle is a promise that tomorrow has calories. You don't have to make the leap to empire with a trumpet. You feel it build in the body first. A looseness in your chest when you realize the hungry month just got shorter. A steadiness in your walk when you know you can pay your way with food that keeps. You hear talk of ochre, of greenstone, of clapsticks from a country you have not yet seen. A boy runs a finger over the notches on a message stick, a whisper of business in his mouth. He doesn't say market. He says who carries responsibility if a canoe breaks and a bundle is lost. He names the aunties who will witness the making right. He names the elders whose lines hold the right to bless the route. Law is not a scroll here. It is a choir. Before long, you will watch a map that refuses to sit still. You will see borders drawn by currents and seasons, not by straight lines and arguments. The coast will become a corridor. The reefs will become gates with keepers. The inland roads will plug into harbors like roots into a river. Midway through this story, when the wind swings and the first foreign sails loom, you will feel a Say empire take shape under your feet, and the Australia in your head will tilt like a bowl. For now, listen. The night thins. A cool seam touches your neck as the dark loses ground. The eel traps still murmur. You step onto a smokehouse platform slick with salt and dew. The horizon lifts like a lid and reveals the pale edge of morning. Canoes knock softly as hands push them into line, hulls whispering against one another like people in a ceremony. You smell mangrove mud and wood smoke and fish oil and the faint pepper of distant fire stick burns. Someone lifts a string of shells and shakes it once. The first tally sticks, click. Dawn peels itself off the water in slow, pale sheets. Your breath ghosts and disappears. Eel bundles lie in rows like coiled rope, each tied to a loop of shell that clicks softly when you lift them. Today is a moving day, not a ritual day. Surplus has to move, or it rots into a story no one eats. You feel the certainty of the system in your hands. Traps that feed smokehouses, smokehouses that feed depots, depots that feed roots. The map is not inked, it is salted. You step through a yard where racks rise like ribs. Women in soot-smeared wraps pull down the night's smoke, press flesh to judge give, thread reed ties with a speed that looks like music. Salt pans glint beyond the huts, shallow trays crusted with yesterday's sun. A boy cracks a crust, the sound like thin ice. He sprinkles the crystals into gourds. You taste the bright sting on your tongue. Not a luxury, a promise that food will outlast weather. The ground opens to cool pits roofed with bark and wet reeds. You lower a bundle and feel the day's heat leave it. A ledger in earth, not on paper. Shell loops slide along a cord in your palm, and you count without looking. 5, 10, 20. The cord is standardized. Fingers know it. The shells are burnished to a size. The tally sings by touch. In the corner, a woman scores a message stick with a bone tip, her breath steady. The pattern measured to a cadence you can repeat later when someone asks, who owes whom and why? By mid-morning, a caravan creaks awake inland. Poles lever axe heads and ochre packs onto shoulders. The greenstone from Mount William is dense and sure, edges wrapped in skin, each head a day of labor stored in stone. Ochre from Wilgie Mia travels in skins and on skin, reds that stain the wrist deep as oath. The air tastes iron-rich even here. The caravan leader places a message stick in your hand. You read it with your fingers. 2 notches for 2 river mouths, a cross-cut for a seasonal ceremony, angled hash for a taboo stretch where the bush should not be named. The law isn't a lecture. It is a map of obligations you can carry without a bag. Downriver, the canoes nose the eddy. Bark hulls rasp as hands push them off silt. The first convoy holds 30 bundles, about 150 kilos of smoked eel, if you had to say it in a number. The river makes them weightless. Men and women stand easy, poles plunging with the rhythm of breath. The lead canoe carries a pilot whose life is a map. He can smell a fresh bank before he sees it, can hear a shoal by the way the water talks against his pole. Birds tilt to mark a sandbar. The clouds run in streets, and he reads them for wind that will matter after sunset. The mouth of the river is a throat where voices meet. On a sand spit, a tax gift exchange is already assembling, not as a queue, but as a ceremony that happens to count. Elders sit in shade, their hair white as scraped bark. Witnesses mark arrival with a low song. The melody is old enough to have teeth. You bind your bundles in front of everyone. A woman with a shell scale measures weight by balance and tilt, her hands confident, her face unreadable. The law is sung, not mumbled. If a bundle is light, you will make it right in eels or labor, and no one needs to raise a spear to underline the point. You lift a string of shells, and the elder shakes his head once. Not that string. The right string is longer by a thumb and has 3 dark shells in the middle, like the eye of a storm. You swap. The elder nods. This is standard, not softness. Standards make strangers possible. Standards let you move more than your legs were built for. The caravan from inland arrives at noon like a dust storm with legs. Shoulders slope, backs shine with sweat, but faces are bright. They unfurl ochre skins, a red so deep it looks wet even when it's dry. They set down greenstone heads that clink like teeth. You trade eel bundles for stone, and both sides look satisfied. Your message stick comes out again. The keeper checks the cuts, calls a witness, taps the stick with a clapstick so the sound stamps the agreement. A child beats time with a foot, learning the shape of obligation without being told he is learning anything at all. By afternoon, the convoy splits. 3 canoes peel off to service a cove, where a family waits with fiber nets that need good hands and good food. The rest push past mangroves that breathe in and out with the tide like sleeping animals. The air thickens. Sour mud, salt, sun-hot fish oil. A controlled burn has left a mosaic of char and green on the bank. The cleared corridor reads like a path even from the water, a safety line drawn with fire. You remember last season's blaze that tried to run like a hungry dog. It didn't. The mosaics held. On land, the caravan moves with a tempo you can set your heart to. Poles thud. Footskins whisper. Rests come on the minute, not by complaint. At a creek crossing, a boy slips. 2 hands grab his pouch before it takes water. The laugh that follows is relief, not mockery. Loss is expensive when everything you carry is a debt you mean to honor. They pass a scar tree where bark was cut to make a canoe last winter. The wound has closed clean. The memory inside the trunk is now a curve, not an open mouth. Someone touches it. The gesture is half gratitude, half inventory. Toward evening, the world fattens with sound. Insects rise in a sharp choir. The river changes pitch as it widens, a deeper vowel. You smell the sea before you hear it. The convoy falls into a new discipline, lines cleaner, poles shorter. Eyes on the bank, where a pilot waits with a reed flag to mark a bar that shifts with the moon. A youth counts aloud without names. 1 set of 30 bundles, 1 set of 28, 1 of 31 after a split, an addition at the last creek. The math is a song. He will remember it when his head is thick with smoke and fatigue. At the river mouth, a sand tongue reaches into the tide like a hand. The elders stand again. This time the exchange is larger, slower, more witnessed. Shell currency strings are weighed against eel, against stone, against labor promises for the next controlled burn. A dispute flickers. A canoe arrived with wet lashings. Someone says the bundles took water. A woman presses a knife into the flesh, nods at the resilience. The bundle holds. The complaint dissolves. The witness hum, lands the decision like a stone settling in a riverbed. Final, unshowy, right. You take a last drink from a cool gourd. The pilot points with his chin, a gesture spare of waste. The horizon is not empty. Thin triangles bite the sky where there should be only clouds. Sails. Not the small square of skin you've seen on a cousin's river rig, but taller, cleaner, the cloth sleeved to a mast and curved like a rib. Foreign is not a curse in your mouth. It is a word that makes your stomach tighten, and your fingers want to count the bundles again. Someone taps a drum 3 times, spaced like heartbeats. Canoes align without shouting. Poles slide up, paddles dip. The convoy breathing as one animal. Inland, the caravan pauses on a ridge. 30 shoulders turning at the same moment toward a glint that wasn't there yesterday. The message stick in your belt feels heavier than wood. The tide sucks seaward. The river becomes a road. And at the seam where fresh and salt argue, cloth flickers like a new kind of wing. The sails resolve into holes that ride higher than your canoes, bows knifing the chop. masts stitched with cloth that bellies and sighs. The word Trepang passes along the line like a fish flicking from hand to hand. Smoke houses on their decks, racks for sea cucumbers laid like dark coins. Makassan, someone says, with the certainty of a person whose uncle once traded knives for cloth and came home with a word that tasted of another wind. You hold the convoy steady on the edge of the bar while a pilot sets a reed marker and traces the safe line with his pole. Your bark canoe snugs alongside a dugout with a higher prow, a cousin's experiment shaped to ride over surf instead of through it. Not an imitation, an answer. A short-sleeved sail leans from a low mast, stitched from fiber and hide. It doesn't make you fast, it makes you less tired. In a day it will save 100 strokes. In a season, it will save a shoulder. The Makassan prows ease in, anchors croaking over bow timbers. Men in sarongs work in unison, hands quick on rigging. They smell of brine and wood smoke and fish oil thick enough to shine on skin. One lifts a hand, palm out. A greeting you've seen before in Arnhem Land. He points toward the mangroves with a question in it. You know the place he means? The sand there is hard enough for careening, the water brackish. The midges bearable if you smoke the edges first. You raise 2 fingers. Wait for the elder. The law walks down the beach with him, not robes or seals. A drum beat, slow as surf on a reef. Witnesses fall in like shadows. You take out the message stick that rode against your hip all day and slide a new stick beside it, bark polished, surface damp to the touch. The keeper kneels with a bone tip and scores lines that curve like wake and turn like wind. The script is not borrowed whole. It sits on top of the old signs like a canoe on a river, buoyant, useful, not pretending to be the water. Curves note season, crosshatches note closures. A hook mark means rescue obligation. An open loop marks safe anchorage if you leave the place as clean as you found it. The sea law is sung so everyone can hold it. Rescue is owed if a hull grounds or a mast breaks. Innocent passage is granted between dawn and dusk through any channel that bears the law song. Anchorage is permitted on sand tongues and careen grounds if the Trepang racks are kept off taboo flats. Seasonal closures hold on the eel runs and on the reefs that feed the nurseries. If a man breaks that closure, he pays in labor and provision and apology in front of witnesses until the reef forgets his name. Arbitration sits at festivals because judgment should be fed properly. A hungry judge is a bad map. A dispute tests the fence before the ink dries. One of your canoes took shelter last storm behind a low eel weir and dragged a pole loose. The owner holds the broken end up like a question. The pilot recounts the night. Gus stepped down the river in fists. The canoe yawed. A child cried. He is not pleading. He is laying a line on the ground so people can see where to walk. The elder touches the broken pole and the canoe's scuffed hull. He looks to the witnesses and to the Makassan captain, because law earns its weight when strangers nod. The decision arrives like a tide. The pilot owes 2 days' labor on tomorrow's repairs and 1 bundle of eel, witnessed by 3 clans. The owner owes the pilot first call on the safe water behind his weir if a squall breaks in the next moon. Debt and shelter platted together. No one leaves poorer. At dusk, the prouse light braziers on their decks, smoke rising in ribbons. Trepang simmer like coins brightening in a fire. A man with salt in his hair shows you a sail seam, the stitch running like a backbone. You show him how your bark ribs flex without splitting. He laughs at the sound and then listens. Exchange sounds like that. Sharp, then soft. He traces the script on your bark with his finger, then writes his own marks on a palm leaf slip, angles and loops like a tide mark. The signs aren't the same, but the meaning matches, and that is enough to moor a season. By the 3rd day, the adapted sail rides on 5 of your dugouts. Only in the afternoons when the sea breeze fills like a lung, poles still rule the mornings, paddles the creeks. You count the gain not in speed, but in reach. A run that asked for 3 rests now asks for 2. 50 bundles travel where 40 did last tide. The pilots gather at night with wet sand under their heels and teach with their hands. Stars step out. The belt low, the Pleiades scattered like seeds. Cloud streets line up to show wind lanes invisible in daylight. You track birds for a shoal and smell a reef before you see it. Iodine and life. North of here, stories say the Torres Strait gardens sit like green beads on a blue rope. Yams lifted from dark dirt. banana mats flashing when the wind turns them, taro fat as a fist. Polities ashore speak with their own drums, their canoes deep with men who know swell by the ache in their knees. You mark the strait on the stick, double line, cross marks for fees and pilots, and you keep your speculation narrow. More traffic, more standards, not armies and files. Word spreads down the coast and inland along the Ochre Road faster than feet could carry it. A reef is closed early because the Trepang have thinned. A careen ground is opened late because a crocodile has claimed it. You watch law scale without breaking, each new cut in bark made only when the old song cannot carry the load. A new clause hums. No fires on the lee side of mangroves when the wind turns north. Too many smokehouses lost to a single careless ember. Another clause goes the other way. If a prow's carpenter repairs a canoe, the canoe's owner owes his knowledge of a safe channel he has used twice. Craft for craft, map for map. The prow sleeve withholds heavy and promises held. They will be back when the winds allow. The Makassan captain presses a small iron blade into your palm, light as a leaf, heavy as intention. You hand him a string of shells measured to the right length and weight and color. The elder writes one last line on the bark, 3 curves, a notch, a long tail that means wind from the east and a meeting in 2 moons, and hands it to the captain like a tide you can fold. Nights later, your own convoy rides under a small sail for the first time, silence discovering new shapes in itself. The hull whispers instead of groans. The pilot watches starfields pivot over the river mouth and listens to the swell thump the outer bar like a drum far away. You sense the country widening without adding land. Distance turns from enemy to teacher. Half a day saved on the run to the next council. 100 strokes saved on a bend that used to make shoulders burn. Logistics is a kind of mercy. Then the message arrives like heat ahead of a storm. A boy runs from the southern spit, breath in tatters. He doesn't waste words. 12 praws, he says. Big ones, racks layered like shelving in a storehouse. Masts taller than the last fleet, and sails patched in patterns you don't know. They are laying smoke at 2 camps and asking for a council before the buildup truly starts. The storm season has teeth this year. If terms are not set, the season will set them for you. The elder's face is stone worn smooth by weather. He lifts the bark ledger and taps the empty space where the next line will go. The festival is 3 nights away. Arbitrators will come by river and sea. The pilots will mark sand tongues with reeds, and the law song will be sung until the words are tight as rope. You look at the horizon where heat makes the air ripple like water, and you feel the calendar close a fist around your ribs. Somewhere beyond the mangroves, masts notch the sky. The council must decide before the first hard rain clubs the roofs. The council arrives like weather you can hear before you see. Drums from 3 directions. Canoes sliding ashore in pairs, hulls kissing sand. Inland delegations step from shade in ochre and charcoal, greenstone heads gleaming under wraps. You feel the festival take the spine of judgment and make it dance. Food first, then law. Eel bundles unwrap with a whisper. Salt stings your lip. Smoke climbs into the evening like a ladder you can climb with your eyes. Marriage songs run in the dark. 2 notes, then a third, like a door opening. You watch hands link people whose rivers do not meet on land, but will meet at sea. Hostages of honor sit near the elders, not in chains, but in ceremony, their safety a living treaty. If someone breaks faith, they break family first, and that is heavier than any spear. The Makassan captains step into the circle with palms open. They set down gifts that clink and shine, iron blades thin as leaves, copper bells that catch sun, cloth stamped with the smell of another ocean. The elder lays the bark ledger flat and wets his bone tip. The words he cuts into the soft surface are not your grandmother's words, and not the captain's either. They are the landing place between currents. Quotas are sung. So many baskets of Trepang per camp, no more. Taboo zones marked with a hooked line, where seagrass needs 1 more season to breathe. Pilotage fees measured in eel bundles and labor on broken weirs. Repair rights granted on the hard sand tongues if no mangrove root is cut and no shell bed is crushed. The captains incline their heads. Their own leaf slips carry loops and angles that echo your curves and crosses. 2 scripts like 2 tides, both pulling the agreement into shape. War does not leave the room, it only sits farther back. You see that in the way men practice at noon, woomera slinging spears so fast the air hisses. The lever lengthens the arm, the spear flexes like a fish, and flies with a sound you don't forget. War boomerangs with weighted arms turn in tight ellipses, and smack shields hard enough to ring a tooth in the jaw. But even here the country writes in the margins. Mangrove channels narrow as throats, sandbars that shift with the moon. Fire stick corridors that keep the undergrowth low so bodies can move without catching. Littoral warfare isn't glory. It is timing and place. Hit holes at low water when keels bite mud. Board in the breath between gusts when cloth slats and sailors swear. Leave before the current changes its mind. You avoid the flat, open places where stories end quickly and badly. On the second morning of council, the air goes heavy with a heat that feels personal. The horizon drops, swallowed by a gray wall. The wind switches from inland to sea like a hand turning a face. The first shock of rain hits so hard it stings. A squall cracks the sky in white bones. You blink salt out of your lashes and see a cutter where no cutter should be. Its mast bare of sensibility, its anchor dragged, its bow shouldering toward the outer bar that loves to chew wood. The Makassan prows have struck sails and turned into the wind, rocking like patient animals. The cutter is new math. It won't do what your body tells a canoe to do. The law runs faster than feet. Rescue is owed, and the word owed has weight you can feel in your shoulders. Canoes push off under half sails and paddles, pilots swearing softly as they read the sand tongues by the tone of breaking water. A woomera goes long, not with a spear, but with a line knotted to a throwing stick. The line arcs and slaps the cutter's rail. A man in a tarred coat stares at you with a face the color of old rope and an eye white with fear. He hauls. You haul. The line sings. Another canoe noses the cutter's stern and shoves, scraping paint and pride both. The mast lifts and then dips again. Your teeth bite your lip. The third canoe slews in and takes a wave full on. Water jumps into the hull and jumps out as the crew heave together. The bar gives up its meal. The cutter slides into the deeper water between your reef and your rule. You tow them past the spit where fire smolders under wet bark, smoke thick to beat down the midges. The air tastes of iodine and lightning. The men on the cutter pitch buckets in a panicked rhythm you could set a drum to. One heaves and vomits. Another laughs that thin laugh too close to crying. The captain, if that's who he is, has a scrap of paper plastered to his chest like a second skin. Ink has bled into blue veins. When you beach the cutter at the careen ground and the storm eases as if someone loosened a belt, he peels the paper away and smooths it. A map, but not like yours. Lines straight as a spear, names that don't belong to the mouth that says them. He taps a place with a shaking nail and says a word that means possession, where your word for the same space means responsibility. Sea law speaks before pride. The elder has the rescue witnessed by 4 clans and 2 prow captains. He names the obligations now owed by the cutter's people, provisions paid for, repairs done with consent, taboo zones respected. A pilot from your confederation will stand at the bow for every entry and exit until the winds are clean again. The man in the tarred coat understands enough to nod. He tries to hand the elder a flag. The elder doesn't take it. Flags are cloth. Cloth burns. The elder takes a small iron nail and taps it into a drift log so the storm's story hangs on something that can't blow away. Later, under a sky rinsed hard and white, they send a boat ashore with men who carry themselves like questions. They wear wool that smells like wet sheep. They bring gifts that are also weights. A saw with teeth that want to bite everything. Beads that find eyes and live there. You offer water from a cool pit and eel that shines. And the law that saved them yesterday saves everyone today. The negotiation smells of fish and sap and sweat. Pilotage fees sit on one side of the ledger, repair rights on the other, harvest quotas on the bottom line, like a keel. Their eyes slide toward the red cliffs. Your finger taps the bark where the taboo curl runs. No, not this season, maybe not any. They want a port. You give them terms for a treaty place instead. You say no guns on shore, and no powder pits dug near mangroves where a bad spark can kill a forest. You say closure on eel runs and a cap on fresh water when the dry bites hard. You say a court at festival time, with elders and captains seated in a circle where no one can pretend not to hear. They want to put names on land that already has names. You say the current already did that. You point to a sand tongue where holes ground every southeast wind and call it what your grandmother called it, the place that asks for care. The captain tries the syllables and fails and then tries again, and this time it lands in his mouth like a small fish. You take his map in both hands. The linen is cool, the ink stiff. Rivers march like decisions, and the coast wears a dress it didn't choose. You unfold your own ledger beside it. No straight lines, currents like ribs, closures drawn as spirals that tighten when a fish stock thins and loosen when fat returns. Anchorages marked with dots the color of burnt bark. Season winds written as long tails that run off the edge of the bark where space runs out, but the air doesn't. He looks from one to the other and makes a small sound, the noise a man makes when his shoe doesn't fit, and he realizes the road will punish him if he lies about it. A Makassan captain steps between the two maps and laughs softly, not unkindly. He points at your currents and at their lines, and then at the reef like a judge. He thumps the bark with a knuckle and the linen with the back of a hand. Equal weight, equal warning. The elder nods. The men in wool turn their heads as if they have just heard the ocean speak. You carry the cutter's nail in your pocket that night and feel its chill at your thigh like a question. The fire stick mosaics glow as low embers along the mangrove line, a stitched seam against the next dry wind. The moon lifts and paints wet on everything. A boy leans against your shoulder and says, "The Makassans called your script beautiful." You tell him he can call it useful, and beautiful will take care of itself. When the tide turns, a thin parcel changes hands. Their chart folded into palm, your bark ledger rolled in string. You slide your thumb under the string and loosen it just enough to see what you already know and to learn what you don't. On their map, borders cut like knives. On yours, borders move with the season like breath. You lift the edge of bark and see a coast not owned but kept, a sea that governs, lines that swell and shrink like lungs. You are still looking when a figure points from the cutter's deck to the south, where a darker shadow leans under sky. More masts, a second hull, a flag with a cross of some sort. The Makassan captain huffs through his nose as if the wind just changed. You feel your ribs tighten the way they do at the mouth of a river when the tide is running out and you know the turn will be violent. Maps are in your hands, currents are in your ears. The next negotiation will not wait for festival drums. They come thicker after that. Seasons layered with masts and stories. And the word empire stops meaning what it meant in the book you carried in your head. You watch power settle into places where food meets law and then moves along the coast like breath. The first treaty place becomes a second and a third, each with its own smell, mangrove and mud, or eucalyptus and hot stone, or kelp and cold spray. Each ruled by the same quiet sentences cut into bark and sung until they fix in bone. You feel the change in your shoulders before you see it on any map. 50 bundles used to be pride, now one convoy carries 100 in good weather, the extra weight paid for by a sail that wastes less of your life. The pilot guild begins as a list and becomes a brotherhood and then a law. 200 names at first, then 3, each pilot vetted by 3 elders and 2 captains. Each name carved into a post at the festival ground, with a notch for every safe passage sworn and kept. When storms come heavy, those notches feel like ribs under your palm. You count them like prayers before the canoe noses into the first gray wall. The shell strings are no longer just payment, they are language. You run a hand along the strand and know coast by the weight. Lighter in the south, where eel surplus bulks up trade. Heavier in the north, where Trepang seasons pull harder. There are zones now, shell length standardized across waters you can cross under 2 moons if the winds help. A long string with 3 dark eyes buys pilotage through a chain of bays known for sneaky bars. A double length with a greenstone set pays for a boat right to shape a new rib in dry season. When someone cheats the length, the shame hits like a spear point, because it isn't just money, it's the grammar of trust. Courts shift from shade trees to pavilions built for wind. The new halls are round, the way a council should be. high-roofed so words can rise and cool and fall where they need to. The adapted script runs along the inner ring, curves for seasons, crosshatches for closures, loops for rescue, angled hashes for taboo. A boy traces the line that means innocent passage with his thumb and says it out loud without knowing he's teaching his brother the law. Cases stack like nets. A Makassan carpenter who shaved a mangrove root too close pays with labor and a promise to teach a local boy a knot that holds when a sail screams. A cutter's man who dropped ash where reeds drink thin pays 3 days carrying water at the next burn. The court is not a place where power displays itself. It is a place where the sea reminds people of its terms. Schools grow like clearings after a careful fire. Morning is for songline navigation. Stars, birds, cloud streets, fungus on south sides. The way a swell talks to a reef 2 days ahead. Afternoon is for tallies and script. Bark and leaf and stick. The scratch of a bone tip. The weight and length of shell strings. A girl says the names of winds in 2 tongues and draws them as tails that curl to show danger. She writes the clause about no fires on the lee side of mangroves when the wind turns north, and then walks with the burn captain to watch how a mosaic holds a blaze like a hand cupping a match. When a field class returns with smoke in their hair and the soles of their feet clean, mothers smile and grandmothers nod. And you know the land is teaching as much as the elders. Iron edges slip into work with the light touch they deserve. A nail now and then where a peg once sat. A small adze that keeps a rib true and saves a wrist. A saw whose bite is watched and bounded. No one is allowed to chew a tree into a scar that won't close. The law for iron is strict because iron is hungry. It takes what you feed it and asks for more. You feed it little, it behaves. The courts set limits that sound like weather. This many nails a moon, this many blades a season, this many repairs at this careen ground with this many witnesses. Iron bows to ecology, or it doesn't come to shore. The fire stick mosaics sprawl into a patchwork you can see from a headland and read like scripture. Char and green, old burn and new growth, corridors drawn for animals and people both. The last dry, when lightning stitched the ridge all night, a dozen embers fell where last generation would have birthed the crown fire. They died in a black square and went to sleep. 1 in 3 storms now finds only fuel that teaches it manners. You count that as a miracle measured in breath. Reefs close and open like eyelids according to rules sung without pity. A no-take patch stays sacred that full cycle, and the next, then loosens when fingers return with fish fat enough to laugh in a pan. Eel stock management is written into the festival the way salt is written into smoked meat. Bundles are counted alongside births and debts. You carry a ledger that smells like river and ash and hold in it a living fishery, not an idea. If someone asks why, you point to a winter when the weirs caught light without care and the rack stood empty until bones showed through cheeks. They nod and help count. Treaty places become ports not because you wished it, but because logistics loves a good habit. 8 along the east coast at first, then 2 more where the shelf bites deep and whales roll past. Bilingual marks hang over shelters, bark curves for winds, ink angles for strangers who want lines that promise the world won't move. The words aren't equals and don't need to be. They serve. A pilot laughs with a captain about names for the same bay. Yours, a sentence that explains the wind. His a Christian saint who has never felt a sandbar punch his belly. They agree to disagree and then agree where to anchor. Somewhere in the shuffle, you realize you are not bracing for someone else's map to land on your food the way a boot lands on small bones. 5 sea confederations ring the continent now like a necklace laid down by seasons. Kimberley to the Gulf, Gulf to the Cape and the Strait, Strait to the East Bays, east down to the eel country back to the Bight. Lines are borders only for as long as a wind holds. Law runs faster than letters and slower than tide when it needs to, and that is the pace of a world that intends to last. You are careful with the word empire, and kinder with the word power. What you have built measures itself not by columns of marching bodies, but by what moves painlessly. Food, obligation, stories, safety. A grandmother can travel 600 kilometers by water, under a cycle of moons, and eat well everywhere, because her shell string speaks a grammar that strangers recognize. A Makassan boy can sit a winter out with an eel clan and return with a word for a reef that saves a hull, and the next year, a carpenter from that clan learns to seam cloth so it doesn't tear where the sky pulls. When you squint at a present tense, this is what the coast looks like. Harbor courts with elders and pilots on benches polished by salt air, treaty flags that smell of smoke because they live near fire, signage that points in two scripts, one curving like wind, one angular like a mast. Schools where a teacher holds a bone tip and a compass and says both are useful and neither is God. Fishing grounds with closures marked by the praise song of kids who like shouting rules more than breaking them. A boat launch where a girl touches a rib and says her grandfather cut this wood with a stone that still lives in a pouch at the prow, and a boy pats a small iron nail and says his aunt said it and made the iron listen. Courts that settle trouble between men in wool and men in bark, and trouble between cousins whose anger could burn a forest if you let it. The map you promised arrives without trumpets. You see Australia not as a wall of shore, but as a mesh of roots. Currents are roads, reefs are gates, river mouths are syllables, treaty places are punctuation. Power is the sentence that runs clean from one end of a season to another without tripping. You lay your fingers on the bark ledger and feel the embossed ridges of laws that you sang before you wrote them. And you lay the linen chart beside it and smile at the straight lines that tried their best and learned to bend. Night comes the way it did when this began. Salt wind, eel traps murmuring in their basalt grammar, clapsticks counting a heartbeat that isn't only yours. You step again onto a smokehouse platform at dawn in your memory, feel slick boards under your feet and the cool cheek of a shell string in your palm. The first tally sticks click. Somewhere beyond the bar, a sail opens like a lung. The sea inhales, the coast answers. And you understand, deep down in your wrists and ribs, that the power you built is simply the art of moving promises through time without letting them die.